When time broke and the future started bleeding, the city of Veridion always thrived on order. Its gleaming towers reflected the sun like mirrors, and the streets pulsed with the rhythm of a life that seemed eternal. But at exactly 3:17 p.m. on a Wednesday, everything changed. It began as a subtle tremor. Not the kind that shakes buildings, but a sensation in the air itself, like reality wavered and sighed. People on the streets paused mid-step, looking around, unsure what they were feeling. Then came the shadows, long, jagged streaks cutting across the sky, moving backward as if time itself had hiccuped. Dr. Liora Vance, a physicist specializing in temporal mechanics, was in her lab atop the tallest tower in Veridion. Her instruments, normally precise to a fraction of a second, were spinning out of control. Data streamed in faster than she could read it. Screens flickered with warnings she had never seen before. Temporal anomaly detected. Causality disrupted. Future bleeding imminent. Liora felt a cold prickle on the back of her neck. She had read theories about temporal fractures, rare and catastrophic, but no one had ever witnessed one. Until now. The lab's gravity field wavered, and the clocks began to spin backward, then forward, then backward again. On the street below, people began to experience strange effects. A child dropped her ice cream, and it slowly floated upward, melting as it reversed into the cone. A man spilled coffee, only to see it leap from the cup back into his mug. Time was bleeding, looping, and snapping in ways no human was equipped to handle. Liora grabbed her communicator. "Control center, do you read me? Something's wrong. Something is breaking time." Static answered her. Then a voice, distorted and alien, said, "Temporal fracture confirmed. Immediate containment required." She froze. That voice wasn't human. Whoever, or whatever, was speaking knew more than she did. Across the city, a tear appeared in the sky. It was like a vertical window showing another world, one filled with shadows, rivers of light that flowed like molten glass, and figures moving in impossible ways. People screamed and pointed, but before anyone could react, the tear pulsed, sending waves of energy down into the streets. Cars froze mid-motion, their engines wailing in reverse. Phones displayed events that hadn't happened yet. Some people caught glimpses of their own deaths, others saw moments they had never lived. Panic spread like wildfire, but the air itself seemed to thicken, slowing movement. Liora activated the temporal containment unit, a device she had built but never tested in the field. It hummed with a low, dangerous energy. "I have to stabilize it," she whispered, knowing that one wrong calculation could make everything worse. The tear in the sky expanded. From it, shadows began to fall. Not shadows like the absence of light, but living shadows that moved with intent. They reached for objects, for people, and when they touched, reality itself seemed to fragment. Buildings shimmered, sometimes transparent, sometimes doubled, as if two timelines were colliding in the same space. In the chaos, Liora saw someone she recognized. Her mentor, Dr. Terran Course, was standing frozen in place, yet his lips moved. She heard him clearly, even though the environment made no sense. "Liora, it's not just breaking. It's bleeding," he said. The future is leaking into the past." She felt her stomach twist. The words made no sense in the normal flow of time, but here, they carried the weight of truth. The fracture wasn't just a tear, it was a wound. And the wound was spilling forward, spilling backward, infecting everything. Then the first wave hit. It wasn't wind, or heat, or light. It was memory. Every person around her experienced flashes of things that hadn't happened yet, some terrifying, some mundane, but all real. People screamed, trying to grasp fleeting moments that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Liora's mind raced. If I can't contain it, if I fail, she couldn't even finish the thought. The future was bleeding, and the present was dissolving into chaos. The lab trembled violently. Instruments shattered, screens exploded in bursts of temporal energy. And from the tear above, a figure stepped forward. A silhouette tall and impossible, moving with a fluidity no human should possess. Its eyes glowed like molten clocks, and it spoke in the same distorted voice. "Time has broken. And now, the bleeding will claim all." Liora steadied herself. Panic threatened to paralyze her, but she had one thought: she had to try. Whatever this was, whatever caused the fracture, she couldn't let the city, or reality itself, be consumed. She pressed her hand to the temporal containment unit. It pulsed, responding to her thoughts as much as her touch. The figure outside tilted its head, almost curiously, as if amused by her attempt to resist. And then, a second tear opened. This one wasn't in the sky. It was in her own lab, stretching through the floor, showing fragments of rooms, streets, and lives that didn't yet exist, and some that would never exist. The future was here, bleeding, unstoppable.
Liora swallowed hard.
If time is bleeding, then maybe it can be stitched. The figure stepped closer, its presence bending the air, warping the very moment she existed in. Do you dare to heal what is broken?
She didn't answer with words. She answered with determination.
The world tilted, twisted, and for a moment it felt as though she was suspended in the flow of all time at once. Past, present, and future collided around her. And in that collision, Liora made a choice that would either save reality or destroy it. The lab shuddered violently as Liora tightened her grip on the temporal containment unit. The device hummed like a living thing, its circuits glowing with unstable energy. The air around her felt heavy, almost viscous, as if reality itself was thickening. Outside, the city of Veridion was no longer recognizable. Streets doubled over themselves. Cars repeated movements in loops, colliding and uncolliding in impossible sequences.
People walked backward while speaking forward.
The future was bleeding into the present, and the present into the past. Liora swallowed hard and focused.
She had to act.
If she waited, the bleeding could reach critical mass, an event so catastrophic that not only the city but the entire planet could collapse into temporal chaos. She activated the unit, watching as tendrils of blue light stretched from its core. Each tendril moved with purpose, latching onto fragments of time, trying to stitch them back into place.
But the bleeding resisted. A shadow moved through the wall.
Liora didn't flinch this time. She had seen worse. The figure she had glimpsed before stepped into the lab fully, its body elongated and fluid, pulsing with a rhythm of time itself. Its molten clock eyes fixed on her. You cannot contain it, the figure said, voice echoing in 1,000 variations. Time is no longer yours to command. I don't care if it's impossible, Liora said, her voice steady despite the chaos. I have to try. The figure tilted its head, considering her. Then it raised a hand, and suddenly the lab was filled with visions of possible futures. Liora saw herself failing, saw the city burning in reverse, saw herself trapped in loops that repeated endlessly. Some futures were worse than others. Whole populations disappearing, streets erasing themselves, people aging backward into nothing. Her hands shook, but she forced herself to focus. I can't fight every future, she whispered. I have to find the one that works. She adjusted the controls on the unit, letting it sync with the natural pulse of the fractured timeline. The tendrils of energy darted outward, wrapping around the bleeding strands of time. For a brief moment, there was a sense of balance. The loops slowed. The shadows faltered. Some people blinked, realizing that the ice cream that had floated upward had returned to the child's hand.
But it was fleeting.
The tear in the sky widened, and a second fracture opened beneath the lab. Liora caught glimpses of streets that hadn't yet been built, of people who would never exist, and of disasters that were just beginning. The city was unraveling like a tapestry under a careless hand. The figure spoke again, softer this time. Do you know why this happened?
Liora paused. No, she admitted. I thought it was a freak event.
A cosmic accident. You are wrong, the figure said. Its voice carried a weight that made the air tremble. This is the future reaching back because it was wounded. Something in your timeline caused it to bleed. Something you have not yet seen.
Liora frowned.
The future, bleeding because of me. Yes, the figure said.
You have choices coming.
But the first step is to survive what has already begun.
She didn't have time to argue.
A wave of temporal energy hit the lab from below, knocking her off her feet. Instruments flew, screens shattered, and the unit skidded across the floor. Liora lunged after it, barely managing to grab the controls before the device was crushed.
The room stabilized, but only slightly.
The shadows still lurked in the corners, creeping along the edges of reality. And outside, the city continued its impossible transformations.
She realized then that the bleeding was selective. Certain areas were more affected than others.
Streets near the older parts of the city flickered like old film reels, while new districts glowed with impossible futures. People in those areas spoke languages that had not yet been invented, and some claimed to remember events that had never occurred.
Liora had an idea.
She could focus the unit on the areas most affected, trying to pull them back into a single coherent timeline. It was risky, too much energy could tear the fracture open completely, but it was the only option.
She activated the directional focus. Blue tendrils shot toward the streets below.
For a moment, the loops slowed, then snapped violently as the future resisted. Buildings doubled, then flickered into transparency. People vanished mid-step, reappearing moments later in different locations, wearing clothes from decades ahead or behind. The figure observed silently, its molten clock eyes following every move. Then it stepped closer.
"Do you feel it?" it asked.
"The timelines are bleeding into your mind. The future is no longer just events, it is memory, sensation, fear, hope.
You are becoming part of it."
Liora felt a pull in her head, as though invisible threads were tugging at her thoughts. She saw visions of herself, older, younger, in places she had never been, doing things she had never done. The pressure was unbearable. Her vision blurred, and she stumbled backward.
But she forced herself to breathe.
She remembered the first rule of temporal mechanics: observe, do not panic. She focused on the core principle: stabilize the fracture, and the future might hold. With trembling hands, she guided the unit's energy. This time, she allowed herself to synchronize with the bleeding strands, letting them flow through her mind rather than fighting them. Images flashed, roads that curved impossibly, people she hadn't met, and disasters that had not yet occurred, but she did not resist. The figure watched, its expression unreadable. Then it nodded once, almost imperceptibly.
Something shifted. The lab trembled less violently.
Outside, the loops slowed, and the shadows paused. The future was still bleeding, but Liora had gained a foothold. She breathed heavily, staring at the figure.
"Why are you helping me?" she asked. The figure's eyes pulsed. "I am not helping.
I am observing. You may succeed, or you may fail. Either outcome is a lesson the universe must witness."
Liora clenched her fists.
"Then I will succeed."
The figure tilted its head.
"Then you must understand what it means to bleed into the future. Every choice you make now will echo there. Every decision will be a wound or a stitch.
Do you comprehend the weight of that?"
She nodded, even though a part of her mind screamed that she did not. Outside, the city continued to fracture and heal in waves. Time was bleeding, yes, but now she had a path, a strategy. The temporal containment unit was her only hope to thread the city, and the world, back into continuity. And deep inside, Liora realized something chilling. The bleeding was not random. It was pointing her toward a single event, one she had yet to face, one that could either end the fracture, or make it permanent. The future was bleeding, and it was calling her. Liora climbed down from the shattered lab tower, the temporal containment unit strapped to her back like a heavy, humming heart. The streets of Veridion were unrecognizable. Time had bled so thoroughly that the city existed in several overlapping realities at once. Cars from the past collided with vehicles of the future.
Pedestrians wore fashions centuries apart.
Buildings twisted, sometimes appearing transparent, other times duplicated, their walls shimmering as if caught between moments.
Her first step onto the street was cautious.
Every movement felt weighted, as though reality itself resisted her. The unit pulsed against her spine, a steady reminder that she was not just observing this bleeding, she was tethered to it. A child ran past her, laughing, but as Liora reached to steady her, the girl flickered. Her body shifted backward a few years, then forward, then fractured into multiple versions of herself, all laughing at once.
Liora froze, swallowing hard.
She had expected chaos, but not this level of temporal distortion. The first real threat appeared as she turned the corner. A group of figures emerged from the street ahead, but they weren't normal people. Their forms wavered like broken holograms, faces flickering between old and young, alive and not. They moved with purpose, reaching for anything solid. Liora recognized what they were almost immediately: temporal echoes. "These are fragments of the future," she murmured, adjusting the unit to project a stabilizing field.
Blue tendrils of energy shot out, wrapping around the figures.
Some dissolved immediately, but others resisted, their shapes twisting violently. One temporal echo reached her, brushing her arm. For a split second, Liora saw her own future, her death, trapped in the heart of the city, the temporal containment unit destroyed.
She yelped and pulled back.
I have to stabilize them," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. The unit hummed violently, almost as if it had a will of its own. Lyra focused, channeling the energy like threads, weaving the fragments back into the timeline. Slowly, the echoes dissolved into streams of light, absorbed into the device.
A distant sound drew her attention.
It was a bell, but it wasn't ringing normally. Each toll reversed and repeated, overlapping like echoes of echoes. She realized it was the city itself, streets, traffic, and clocks, bleeding into her reality. The temporal containment unit wasn't enough. She needed something stronger, something that could anchor time itself. Lyra moved toward the city center, where the largest tear had opened. She had seen glimpses of it from the lab, a swirling window of molten light and shadows, showing a city that shouldn't exist, rivers flowing backward, and figures moving in impossible ways.
But being there in person was different. The tear was alive.
It pulsed with an energy that made the hairs on her arms stand on end.
From the edges of the tear, shadows began to pour out again.
This time, they were larger, more organized, moving as if they had intent. Lyra ducked behind a crumbling wall, watching them claim buildings, twisting reality around themselves. People screamed, some vanishing into fragments before anyone could help them. Others ran, but the streets rearranged beneath their feet, making escape nearly impossible.
She knew what she had to do.
She activated the unit fully, pouring all her energy into it. Tendrils of stabilizing light shot toward the tear, trying to stitch it shut. For a moment, it seemed to work. The shadows faltered, the molten light dimmed. But then the figure she had seen in the lab appeared above the tear, its eyes molten clocks glowing brighter than ever. "Do you see now?" the figure said, voice echoing across the city. "Time cannot be tamed by a single human. The future bleeds because the present is broken. And the present is broken because of you."
Lyra's heart skipped. Me?
"I didn't do this," she shouted, even though a small voice inside her wondered if that was true.
The figure didn't respond.
It simply gestured, and the tear pulsed, sending a shockwave that threw her to the ground.
When she got up, she realized the city had changed again. Streets she had walked moments ago no longer existed. Buildings twisted into shapes that defied logic.
People from different centuries collided, and in the chaos, Lyra caught glimpses of events she hadn't lived, wars, disasters, and strange, peaceful futures that were bleeding into her own. She understood something terrifying. The bleeding wasn't random.
It was guided.
The fracture was leading her, teaching her, warning her, or perhaps punishing her. Each step she took revealed a new layer of the future, some promising, some horrifying. And the shadows were not just attacking. They were her guides, showing what might come if she failed. Lyra took a deep breath, steadied herself, and moved forward. If she wanted to survive, she had to reach the heart of the fracture. Only there could she attempt to stitch the future into the present, and possibly stop the bleeding before it consumed everything. But as she approached the tear, the air itself changed. Time seemed to slow, then speed up, then reverse. Voices of people long dead and not yet born echoed in her ears. She realized, with a chilling clarity, that the fracture wasn't just a wound in time. It was a living memory. And the memory of the future was as dangerous as any weapon.
A figure stepped out of the tear.
Not the one from the lab, but another, smaller, almost human in shape, yet impossibly precise in movement. It looked at her, eyes like liquid silver. "You cannot mend what is already bleeding," it said. "The choice is not yours. You may try, but the future will remember your failure." Lyra steadied herself. "Then I'll make it remember success."
The figure tilted its head.
"Do you understand what that will cost?" "I understand enough," Lyra said, gripping the temporal containment unit. "I will pay any cost. The city, the people, reality itself depends on it." The figure stepped aside, and the path to the tear was open, for now. The city seemed to hold its breath. Even the shadows paused. Time was bleeding, yes, but for the first time, Lyra felt that she might have a chance to fight back. She took a deep breath, then stepped forward into the pulsing heart of the fracture, the bleeding future stretching before her like a wound in the universe itself. Lyra stepped closer to the tear. The air around it vibrated with impossible frequencies, and every heartbeat felt amplified. The temporal containment unit pulsed in response, as if warning her of the danger, and encouraging her to go forward at the same time. She took a deep breath and stepped into the fracture. The moment she crossed the threshold, the world changed completely. She was no longer in Veridion, or at least, not any version of it she had known. Streets curved impossibly, Buildings twisted upward into the sky in impossible spirals, and rivers of molten light flowed through what should have been solid ground. The air smelled metallic and electric, and she felt herself pulled in multiple directions at once. Her first instinct was panic, but she forced herself to focus. Observe, do not panic. She reminded herself of that rule again and again, letting the blue tendrils of the unit stretch into the chaotic flow of time. They latched onto fragments of the bleeding future, pulling them gently toward stability. She didn't have long to admire, or fear, the fractured city. Figures appeared from the glowing rivers of light, half human, half impossible. One carried weapons from centuries ahead, another wore garments that had not yet been invented. Their faces flickered constantly, as if the memory of their lives was uncertain. They were aware of her. Some attacked instinctively, others simply observed, their eyes reflecting lifetimes she had not lived. A scream drew her attention. She turned, and saw a woman struggling to hold onto a child that flickered in and out of existence. The child's form was already partially from the future, its eyes reflecting events that hadn't happened yet. Without thinking, Liora stretched a tendril of the unit toward them. The energy wrapped around the child and woman, anchoring them to a stable timeline. For a brief moment, they froze, solid and safe. The child's eyes met hers, wide and terrified, and then they blinked, and vanished into thin air, returning to a timeline she couldn't reach. Lyra's chest tightened. The bleeding was selective, chaotic, and cruel. Some fragments could be saved, others were lost. She realized the fracture was not just a wound in time, it was a test, forcing her to confront the consequences of survival and loss in a reality that no longer followed rules. A sound behind her made her spin. Another figure had emerged, this one unmistakably human in form but distorted, with elongated limbs and silver eyes that reflected countless possibilities. It spoke, voice calm but layered with echoes. "You seek to mend what has already fractured," it said. "Do you not see? The bleeding will not stop because it has no beginning or end. Every choice you make creates new wounds, new threads of time to stitch, and more futures to bleed into the present." "I don't care," Liora shouted, her voice trembling but determined. "If I don't try, nothing survives. Not the city, not the people, not even the future itself." The figure regarded her silently, then stepped aside, revealing a path through the glowing rivers. "Then walk carefully. Each step is a memory, each choice a blade. One wrong move, and you will become part of the bleeding, lost to all timelines." She moved forward cautiously, every footstep warping reality beneath her. Buildings flickered, streets shifted, and echoes of people who had not yet existed whispered past her. She felt their lives brush against her consciousness, fragments of emotion, fear, and hope that threatened to overwhelm her mind. Suddenly, the unit pulsed violently. Liora stumbled, nearly falling into one of the molten rivers. She realized that a massive fragment of the future was trying to assert itself, a wave of events that had not yet occurred pressing into the present. If she didn't act fast, the wave could destabilize the entire fracture. She raised her hands, letting the unit channel every ounce of its energy. Tendrils shot out, weaving through the chaos, wrapping the fragment in a stabilizing net. For a brief moment, the river of molten light froze, and the fragment solidified into a coherent timeline. Liora collapsed to her knees, exhausted but alive. From the shadows, the first figure appeared again. The one from the lab, eyes molten clocks glowing brighter than before. "You are stronger than I anticipated," it said. "But this is only the beginning. The bleeding is not just time, it is consequence. And consequence is not merciful." Liora struggled to her feet. "Then I will be," she said. "I will find a way to stitch it, even if it costs me everything." The figure tilted its head, then gestured toward the center of the fracture. A massive structure floated above the rivers of molten light, a spire of impossible geometry that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of all possible futures. "There," the figure said. "The heart of the bleeding. That is where your choices will matter most. But beware, the closer you get, the more the future will fight back." Liora swallowed hard, gripping the unit tightly. The path ahead was uncertain, the danger immense, but she had no choice. If she wanted to save Veridion, she had to reach the heart of the fracture. As she stepped forward, the world around her rippled and folded. People from the past and future appeared and disappeared. Shadows crept along the edges, reaching for her, testing her focus. Each step became a battle between memory and possibility, between survival and annihilation. And in the distance, the spire pulsed again, brighter and larger than before, calling her forward. The bleeding heart of time awaited, and the fate of all reality would be decided there. The spire loomed before Liora like a living wound in the universe. Its surface rippled with molten light, folding and unfolding into impossible geometries. Time itself seemed to bend around it, forming loops that twisted like coils of smoke. Every pulse of the spire sent waves through the fractured city, making streets shift, buildings flicker, and shadows writhe. Liora steadied herself, gripping the temporal containment unit. It hummed like a beating heart, resonating with the energy of the fracture. Each step closer to the spire felt like stepping deeper into the bloodstream of time itself. Every pulse carried fragments of the future, memories not yet lived, and consequences not yet born. From the edges of the spire, figures emerged. They were not shadows this time, nor echoes. They were fragments of the future solidified into the present. Soldiers with weapons that had not yet been invented marched alongside children who would never exist. Entire streets flickered into existence, populated with people and animals from centuries ahead. Liora realized that this was the bleeding at its most concentrated, a flood of probability, solidifying into reality before it had a right to exist. The first wave hit her like a physical force. Liora staggered backward as visions of herself and others flashed before her eyes. A future where she had failed, where the city was destroyed, where people she loved were erased from existence.
She nearly dropped the unit.
The weight of it was more than physical. It was emotional, temporal, and mental all at once. A voice echoed from the spire, layered and impossible to locate. It was the same as before, but now there were many variations, overlapping. You cannot stop what is already bleeding. Every thread you touch will fracture again. Every choice has already been made, and unmade, and made again.
Liora's jaw tightened.
Then I will force it to hold, she shouted, even as her voice felt swallowed by the waves of time. She activated the unit at full capacity, sending out pulses of stabilizing energy. The tendrils reached into the heart of the spire, latching onto fragments of the future.
The effect was immediate.
Parts of the spire flickered, solidified, then expanded. The fragments of the future it had been sending into the city resisted, thrashing violently, some dissolving, others exploding into streams of light that streaked across the fractured streets. Liora felt every explosion in her mind, a shockwave of possibility and loss. She fell to her knees, trying to steady her thoughts, trying not to let the bleeding consume her consciousness. From the molten surface of the spire, a figure emerged, more human than the others, but impossibly perfect in every way. Its eyes were silver mirrors, reflecting both Liora and multiple versions of herself. It spoke, voice calm but heavy with inevitability. You cannot mend the fracture alone. Every attempt to stitch it will only scatter the future further. To heal this, you must understand why it broke.
I don't even know why it broke. Liora gasped.
I've done my best, and the city is still falling apart. You are part of the cause, the figure said.
And part of the solution.
The fracture is not random. It is a wound left by choice, by negligence, by fear. The future bleeds because the present is unwilling to face itself.
Liora's mind raced.
Then how do I stop it? The figure extended a hand. From its palm flowed threads of glowing energy, intertwining past, present, and future. You must enter the heart fully. There, you will face every possible outcome of your choices. You will confront the consequences of failure and success alike. Only then can you stitch the bleeding into a single path. The gravity of the task hit her like a wave. To enter the heart of the fracture was to confront not just the bleeding city, not just the fragments of the future, but the entirety of possibility itself. One wrong step, one lapse in focus, and she could be lost, not just to time, but to existence. Liora took a deep breath, steeling herself. Then I'll do it. I have no choice. The city, the people, everything depends on it. The figure nodded, and the molten threads of the spire parted, revealing a path leading straight into the heart of the fracture. The light was blinding, the air shimmering with impossible geometries. Liora took her first step and felt herself stretch, expand, and contract all at once, as if her body existed in multiple times and spaces simultaneously. Inside the heart, the bleeding was total. Streets, buildings, and people from countless futures were all layered on top of one another, a chaotic tapestry of probability. Shadows lurked at the edges, and fragments of herself, older, younger, braver, terrified, emerged from the light, each one a possible outcome of the choices she could make. The temporal containment unit pulsed violently. Liora realized that it could not hold the bleeding alone. She had to merge with it, become part of the stabilizing process. The thought terrified her, but she forced herself to focus. She reached out, letting the unit's energy flow into her, letting herself feel the threads of time as if they were extensions of her own being. The spire pulsed again, and for a brief moment, Liora saw clarity. She understood that the bleeding was not a curse, nor random chaos. It was memory, consequence, and potential manifesting physically. And now, she had a choice, to weave it together into coherence, or to let it continue to bleed, consuming everything. Liora clenched her teeth, gripping the unit. "Then I choose," she whispered. "I choose the future that survives." The spire reacted immediately. Threads of the future surged toward her, some threatening, some welcoming, all alive. Liora braced herself, knowing that the next moments would determine not just her life, but the survival of Veridion, and perhaps all of time. The heart of the fracture pulsed violently, sending ripples of molten light through the fractured city outside. Liora stood at the center, the temporal containment unit strapped to her chest, thrumming with energy like a living heart. Every pulse of the spire sent waves through her body, bending her perception of time. She felt herself simultaneously in the past, present, and multiple futures, every heartbeat overlapping with countless others. The fragments of the future surged around her. Streets twisted, people flickered between being and not being, and shadows moved with purpose, testing her focus. Liora realized she could not stabilize the bleeding by standing apart. She had to become part of the process, her consciousness, her choices, her very presence acting as the anchor for the timeline. She took a deep breath and placed her hands on the unit. Blue tendrils of energy extended outward, wrapping around the molten threads of the spire. She allowed herself to feel the bleeding fully, the terror, the loss, the potential. Every vision of the city destroyed, every possible death she had glimpsed, pulsed through her mind. For a moment, it was overwhelming. Her body trembled as if she were being pulled in all directions at once. Then, slowly, she let herself merge. She synchronized her thoughts with the energy of the unit. Tendrils of blue light coiled around the threads of the bleeding future, weaving them gently but firmly into a coherent pattern. The fragments of the city outside began to stabilize. Buildings stopped flickering, streets held their shapes, and some of the people, the ones she could anchor, solidified into reality. But the bleeding fought back. Shadows lashed out, and molten rivers surged violently, threatening to pull her under. Liora's mind split as she felt multiple versions of herself from possible futures appear, one terrified, one confident, one broken. Each tried to assert itself, each demanding different actions. She had to focus, to prioritize, to choose which threads mattered most. "You cannot hold all possibilities," the silver-eyed figure said from the edge of the spire. "Every choice leaves a wound. Every stitch creates a scar. The bleeding is infinite, but you are not." "I don't care," Liora whispered, teeth gritted. "I will hold what I can. I will stitch the future that can survive." The unit pulsed violently in response, and for the first time, Liora felt a strange harmony. She was no longer merely stabilizing the fracture, she was flowing with it, her consciousness intertwined with the threads of time. The bleeding future pushed back, but she pushed harder, weaving streams of possibility into a single coherent path. Moments flashed around her, visions of disasters, of people lost, of wars that had not yet been fought. Liora took each one in, acknowledged it, and let it pass into the unit. Each fragment that resisted threatened to overwhelm her, but she drew on her inner strength, the knowledge that the city and everyone in it depended on her. A massive surge struck her from the center of the spire, throwing her to the ground. She felt her mind fracture for an instant, the temptation to let go of the struggle overwhelming. Shadows whispered her failures, futures where she had died, where the city burned endlessly. But she forced herself to breathe, to focus, to anchor herself to the single thread of the future she wanted to preserve. The silver-eyed figure stepped closer, its eyes reflecting 1,000 timelines. "You are merging, but it will cost you. Every second you remain connected, every fragment you stabilize, will draw from your life, your memory, your essence. Are you willing to pay that price?" Liora's chest heaved. "I am," she said. "If I fail, everything dies. If I survive, it doesn't matter. The future matters more than I do."
The figure nodded once. Then proceed. But do not falter. Liora placed both hands firmly on the unit, letting its energy pour through her. The spire reacted immediately, threads of molten light bending and snapping, flowing into her consciousness. She felt herself stretching across time, past, present, future, all converging into a single point. The fragments of the bleeding city outside began to slow, then solidify. Streets stopped shifting, buildings held steady, and people she had anchored stopped flickering, finally existing fully in reality. The shadows shrieked and lashed out, but Liora held firm. Tendrils of blue energy wrapped around the edges of the spire, weaving the bleeding threads together, patching the wound in time. She felt her body weaken, the strain immense, but she did not let go. Every fragment stabilized brought her closer to the center, closer to completing the merge. Then she saw it, a final wave of the bleeding future, larger than anything before. It was a vision of the city entirely consumed, people erased, streets gone, the entire world reduced to molten strands of possibility. She knew this was the ultimate test, the single moment where the fracture could either heal or collapse completely. Liora gritted her teeth and raised the unit. "This ends now," she whispered. She pushed every ounce of energy through herself and into the spire. Tendrils of light wrapped around the massive wave, anchoring it, folding it, weaving it into coherence. The spire pulsed violently, brighter than before, and then, slowly, began to shrink. Outside, the city stabilized. Buildings solidified, streets aligned, and people blinked, realizing they were whole again. Some remembered glimpses of impossible futures, but most were unaware of what had almost happened. The bleeding had slowed, then stopped, leaving Liora exhausted but alive. She collapsed to her knees, panting. The spire now floated silently, its molten light dimmed. The figure approached her, no longer intimidating, just observing. "You have merged with the flow. You have stabilized the bleeding. But remember this, the fracture is healed for now, but the future is fragile. One careless choice, one moment of fear, and the bleeding could return." Liora looked at the unit, which now hummed softly, almost peacefully. "I understand," she said. "And I'll be ready." The figure nodded once and stepped back into the spire, which slowly dissolved into the stabilized city. The shadows faded. The molten rivers of light vanished. Time flowed normally once again. For the first time in hours, or maybe lifetimes, Liora felt something she had not felt in a long time: relief. The bleeding future had been tamed, for now. But deep in her mind, she knew the battle had changed her. Time had left its mark, and she would carry it forever. The city of Veridion was alive again, but Liora knew that the fracture had shown her something important. The future was not just a path to follow, it was a responsibility to protect, stitch by stitch, moment by moment. And as she walked back through the streets, now whole again, she realized the cost of being its guardian. She had touched the bleeding heart of time itself, and it had touched her back. The city of Veridion looked whole again. Or at least, it seemed whole. Buildings stood straight, streets aligned properly, and the people moved normally. The chaos of the bleeding future had stopped, but Liora knew better than to trust appearances. Time had left marks, subtle but dangerous, scattered through the city like invisible cracks in glass. She stepped carefully onto the streets, the temporal containment unit now quiet but still warm against her chest. People passed by, some stopping briefly to look at her as if sensing something different. A few whispered words she didn't understand, perhaps fragments of futures that had now been erased. Liora ignored them and focused on the larger picture. The first sign of lingering consequences came in the form of minor anomalies. Street lamps flickered irregularly. A car disappeared for a heartbeat and reappeared a few meters away. A pedestrian blinked, then gasped as if remembering a life they had never lived. These small fractures were nothing compared to the bleeding she had faced in the heart of the fracture, but they were dangerous. If left unchecked, they could widen. Liora followed the thread of energy left behind by the unit, trying to trace these anomalies back to their source. Each step felt heavier than the last. She realized that merging with the flow of time in the spire had changed her perception of reality. She could see faint traces of the paths she had stabilized, the threads of the future she had anchored, but also the shadows of what could have been. It was then she noticed something unexpected, figures moving along the edges of her perception. Not people, but shadows, different from the ones from the heart of the fracture. These were sharper, more focused, like predators watching her every move. She reached instinctively for the unit.
They are not gone, the silver-eyed figure's voice whispered in her mind, though she hadn't seen it appear. The bleeding leaves its mark. Some threads resist stabilization.
Some fragments learn.
Some remember.
Lyra's stomach tightened.
Fragments that remember, you mean they are still alive?
Yes, the figure said. And they will act. They are pieces of futures that were not meant to exist in this timeline.
Now they linger, testing, probing, learning.
A chill ran down her spine.
The realization hit her, the bleeding had not fully ended. Some remnants of the fractured future were still here, watching, waiting. And they would influence reality unless she acted. She moved through the city cautiously, following the faint pulse of the unit. Each anomaly she encountered now was smaller but more subtle. An object appearing out of place, a person speaking in a language not yet invented, a memory that felt wrong. She stabilized each one as best she could, but the effort drained her energy faster than she had anticipated. Then she saw it, a ripple in the air, like heat waves on a summer day, forming a silhouette. It looked human at first, but the outline shimmered and warped. Lyra approached slowly. "You've done well," the silhouette said, voice layered with echoes of multiple futures.
"But this is only the beginning. You think the bleeding was a random accident.
You think the fracture was a one-time event. You are wrong."
Lyra raised the unit defensively. "Who are you?"
"Another fragment."
The figure shook its head.
"I am the origin, the source that senses all possible timelines. The fracture began because the present refused to see what was coming. The bleeding is a warning, and the shadows are the consequence. You have patched what you could, but the wound runs deeper than even you understand." Her hands tightened around the unit. "Then tell me, how do I stop it completely?"
The figure's eyes shimmered like liquid silver.
"You cannot stop it completely. The future is infinite, and every choice creates ripples.
But you can prepare.
You can guide the bleeding, anchor the timelines, and ensure that what must survive, survives. The lesson is this: control is an illusion. Stewardship is your only option."
Lyra's mind reeled.
The scale of her task was greater than she had imagined. She had stabilized the heart of the fracture, but the consequences of her actions, and the shadows of the future that had not yet been erased, would follow her. The bleeding was not gone. It was a persistent force, a living memory of the possible and impossible. The silhouette stepped back, fading into the rippling air. "Remember this," it said. "The future remembers you, as you remember it. Every choice you make now is both a stitch and a scar. The bleeding will test you again. And when it does, you must be ready." Lyra stood alone in the streets, feeling the weight of the city and its timelines pressing down on her. She had survived the bleeding, stabilized the fracture, and anchored the present, but the lingering consequences were undeniable. The shadows that remained were patient, watching, learning. And somewhere, deep in the strands of the future, new fractures could emerge at any moment. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. The city was whole again, but only because she had become its guardian. She would patrol the threads, heal the minor wounds, and prepare for whatever the future tried next. The temporal containment unit hummed softly, as if sensing her resolve. The bleeding had taught her a crucial truth: the future was alive, and it remembered. And now, so did she. The city of Veridion lay quiet beneath a sky that had begun to shine normally again. The streets were solid, the buildings aligned, and the people moved through their lives as though nothing had ever happened. But Lyra knew the truth. Time had been wounded, and the wound had left scars that only she could see. The temporal containment unit rested against her chest, quiet now, but still warm. She had merged with it, allowed its energy to flow through her, and stabilized the heart of the fracture. But she could feel the lingering threads, faint vibrations in the air, remnants of the bleeding future that had not fully dissipated. Lyra walked through the streets slowly, observing the small anomalies, the flickering lamp posts, the misplaced objects, the faint echoes of futures that could have been. She stabilized each one by one, guiding the threads back into coherence. The process was exhausting, but she had learned to move with patience and focus. Each stabilized thread felt like a heartbeat restored to the city itself. From the shadows, the last remnants of the future manifested. Figures that had resisted merging with the flow appeared, translucent and flickering, their eyes reflecting impossible possibilities. Some were echoes of herself, others were strangers whose lives had never existed. They approached cautiously, testing her resolve. "You have done well," a voice said, layered and distant, yet familiar. It was the silver-eyed figure, though it now appeared more like a guardian than a threat. The bleeding is nearly contained, but these fragments remain because they remember what you have done. They test you, to see if the future can be guided by one who has merged with it. Liora tightened her grip on the unit. I won't let them destabilize what I've saved, she said. Her voice was steady, carrying the weight of determination. I've learned from the fracture. I know now that the future is not something to control, it's something to protect. The figure nodded. Good. Then you understand your role. The bleeding will return in ways you cannot predict. But you, and you alone, are its guardian. Its steward. Its anchor. Liora took a deep breath and raised her hands, letting the energy of the unit extend outward. The fragments hesitated, then slowly, almost reluctantly, merged into the threads she had already stabilized. The city pulsed softly, as if sighing in relief. Time flowed smoothly again, but Liora could feel its memory of the bleeding lingering in the edges of reality. She knew that the fracture had changed her. She was no longer just a physicist or an observer, she was a participant in the fabric of time itself. Her consciousness had touched the bleeding future and returned, carrying both the weight of responsibility and the knowledge that even the smallest action could echo across centuries. As she walked through the streets, she saw people she had glimpsed in visions from the heart of the fracture. Some were smiling, some confused, none aware of what had nearly happened. The city was alive, breathing, stable, but fragile. The silver-eyed figure appeared once more, standing silently beside her. Remember this, it said. You are the guardian of the flow. The future will test you again, and again. Each thread you stabilize is a victory. Each scar you leave is a lesson. Do not forget the cost, but do not fear it either. Liora nodded. I won't, she said. I understand now. The future is alive. It remembers. And so do I. The figure faded into the light, leaving her alone in the quiet streets. For the first time in what felt like lifetimes, Liora allowed herself to breathe. She looked up at the sky, unbroken and calm, and felt a strange sense of peace. The city was safe, for now. But she knew that vigilance was eternal. The bleeding of the future was not over. It never would be. She turned her gaze to the horizon, where the sun reflected off the towers of Veridion. Every choice she made from this point forward would be a stitch in time, a thread anchoring the present to the possibilities of tomorrow. And she would be ready. The temporal containment unit pulsed softly, like a heartbeat in sync with hers. Liora smiled faintly, a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. She had faced the bleeding heart of time itself and survived. Now, she was its guardian. And somewhere, far beyond what she could see, the future waited. Waiting to be guided. Waiting to be remembered. The city was alive. Time flowed. And Liora walked forward, ready for whatever the bleeding future would throw at her next.